Staging the situation, the 2008 Andean crisis was a diplomatic crisis which occurred between the historical Bolivarian republics, with Ecuador and Venezuela on one side and the US-backed Colombia on the other. The situation unfolded when the CIA, or DEA, still uncertain, tipped off the Colombian military to the exact location of Paul Reyes, known FARC leader, due to an intercepted phone call between himself and Hugo Chavez. Tracking the location, the Colombians learned of his location and conducted a raid, now known as the Angostura Raid, named so for the small northeastern Ecuadorian pueblo it was near. The raid, conducted 2 days after the Colombian military intelligentsia were made aware of Reyes's location in Ecuador, was conducted without Ecuadorian authorization, and thus was an illegal entrance by the Colombian Air Force into foreign airspace. Colombia quickly hailed it as a victory, as it was the first time Colombia had killed a major FARC leader in action, and heralded it as a major victory in the war on drugs, still being waged by the firm-handed president himself, Álvaro Uribe. The fallout was swift, with Ecuador cutting ties the next day and Rafael Correa saying that the attack was a massacre against those with lesser technology. The crisis itself was about narco-trafficking policy and the issues arising from bordering states having radically different procedure to curb it. Simply put, the pink-eyed states of Ecuador and Venezuela were more likely to negotiate with FARC, while Colombia had been pursuing a tough war on drugs-like policy nationwide since Uribe's predecessor, Andres Pastrana. This will be an investigation into the factors that led up to the Angostura raid to see if it was in fact negligence by the Ecuadorian state in pursuing drug traffickers, or unneeded aggressiveness by Colombia trying to gain ground in the war on drugs. The existence of friction and quick cut of diplomatic relations in the Andean crisis can be attributed to the unsteady relationship between socialist Venezuela and Colombia leading up to the incident. Chavez was previously allowed to mediate some FARC-Colombian negotiations the year prior, but Uribe quickly ended the Chavez-led mediation processes after a scandal. BBC Mundo journalist Hernando Salazar recounts that Chavez contacted the head of the Colombian Armed Forces, Mario Montoya, with journalists speculating it may have been Chavez trying to gain political capital within Colombia and circumvent the president. The effort, nefarious or not, was stopped by Uribe and led to Chavez resorting to name-calling in the press, calling the Colombian president a liar and a shill for the U.S. Such a response led to understandable diplomatic frostiness between the neighboring states throughout much of the year, also affecting Ecuadorian relations as a result of Venezuela and Ecuador being close diplomatic allies. Other Ecuadorian-Colombian interactions in the mid-2000s only worsened the situation in 2008. In the Alfredo Palacios presidency, Colombia violated Ecuadorian airspace multiple times in FARC-related endeavors, even causing a lesser version of the Andean crisis, where the Colombian consul was kicked out due to Colombia flying in Ecuadorian airspace. This was only worsened when Correa entered office the next year, with opposites Uribe and Correa failing to prevent the Andean crisis through joint effort or effective communication throughout much of 2007 and 2008. This lack of communication and lack of openness only exacerbated the situation at hand. Ecuador's lack of border presence came down to simple economics, as they spent far less than their northern neighbor on defense. Unsurprisingly, Colombia's fighting of a prolonged war against a narco-state known as FARClandia spent exponentially more than its smaller neighbor on its military, with U.S. funding only further ballooning Colombia's military budget. Ecuador had slashed military spending the year before, only further weakening the border defense in that nation, as Correa hoped to focus more on social and economic programs during his tenure rather than military might. As Colombia became harder to operate in, especially near the ports, narco operations moved to Ecuadorian jungles for safety and coasts for transporting narcotics to Mexico. These goods would often be transported using the infamous narco subs constructed by traffickers to carry largely cocaine. Reyes, the leader killed in the Angostura raid, simply was in hiding as the Uribe-directed military pursued a FARC decapitation plan, as it was called, a plan Uribe championed that targeted specific leaders of FARC to cripple that organization. Defense Minister and future President Juan Manuel Santos said that the military had been tracking Reyes across Ecuadorian borders but feared leaking the information to Ecuador as they may not maintain secrecy, even revealing that they had been informing the Ecuadorian military of his movement with little response or actions from them. The prevailing fear was if Colombia told higher-ups in the Ecuadorian legislative branch, it would eventually reach the ears of a corrupt bureaucrat who would tell Reyes to move locations or leave for another country in exchange for cash. The early Correa presidency was marred with civilian military scandals like the La Rea case, where the namesake Interior Minister of Ecuador met with Reyes to try to exchange hostages on his own volition, even offering hostages who were known to be in a Colombian jail. Uribe understood that the quickest way to prove his so-called decapitation program worked was striking at Reyes, but it also was in the airspace of a nation almost antithetical to his politics and leadership style, leading to the Andean crisis. In short, the Andean crisis shows how polarized politics can inhibit progress, as both states saw FARC generally as a threat, but one combated it meaningfully in the given situation. The two nations' drug policies were too different for effective cooperation to occur between them, with even the simplest of joint tactics resulting in fewer lives being taken in the raid. The La Ria case, which was revealed after the event of the Andean crisis, at least justifies some of Uribe's misgivings about the likelihood of Ecuadorian bureaucrats staying loyal to the government. I've come to see the Andean crisis as more of the fault of Ecuador's, even though their airspace was violated, which by many is seen as an act of war. This is largely because they allowed Reyes, known killer of 100-plus Colombian civilians, to continue roaming the northeastern countryside and did little to help Colombia at least push him back into his own nation for Colombian authorities to apprehend him. This is not meant to demonize Ecuador or even Correa, but the diplomatic strategy fares poorly when a known terrorist agent is essentially allowed to set up a safe haven in your nation. This type of non-cooperation will hopefully not repeat itself, as the Andeans nearly led themselves into a pointless war that would have only scarred the nations further. With Nobel Prize laureate Juan Manuel Santos in the executive position in Colombia, FARC conflicts have begun to cool down, and the Bolivarian Republic seem to have a closer relationship. Some important sources in my paper include War Without Borders, The Colombia-Ecuador Crisis of 2008 by Gabriel Marchella, the news article Uribe Termina Mediación de Chávez by Hernando Salazar of BBC Mundo, and also website Diálogo, also known as the Forum of the Americas, for their article